Greetings and welcome to this all new episode of Let's Create Something with Trapcode TAO. And today we're gonna create something like this, a sphere of eyeballs. So to do that, we're gonna create our own custom texture with all native tools in After Effects. And we're gonna look at how to apply that on sphere elements, which we're gonna plug in some looping wiggle from Dan Ebbert in order to animate their random rotation. So let's not lose any more time and let's start right away. So let's create a new project in After Effects and let's make a new composition. So we're gonna make this square composition, so let's make it 1080 by 1080 and we don't need no more than 700 frames, let's say. So first of all, as always, we're gonna create a new solid, so Control Y, and let's call this one TAO. Doesn't matter, any color is okay. So let's fetch our TAO effect from our effects and preset panel, and let's apply that on our solid. So first of all, we're gonna make our eyeball texture. So let's focus on one eyeball to start. So in order to do that, we're gonna create a new light object. So let's hit Control Alt Shift and L, and this one we're gonna make it a spotlight, and we want something that's not gonna be a path. We want to create just one single sphere in order to apply our texture and work on it. So let's call this one TAO sphere, all in caps, and that will create a sphere element which is independent from the offset path of Trapcode TAO, so we can move it around and keyframe the position in the timeline as we would do on any other element. So let's create this light, hit OK. That will drop on a sphere in the middle of our composition. Well, not right in the middle, but let's simply create a new null. So Control Alt Shift Y, and let's make it 3D. We're gonna hit P to reveal the position and simply copy and paste it to make our sphere at the center. Right. So for the moment, we're gonna turn off the automatically created path generator, and we're gonna look at our sphere. Let's create a new solid. And let's make this solid twice as wide as it is tall. So let's make this one 1000 wide and 500 height. And we're gonna pre-compose that. So Control Shift C, or if you want to use layer pre-compose. And let's call it iText. So when we pre-compose, let me just undo this step. It's important to leave all the attributes because we want our texture to be this dimension and not this dimension. So let's double click on it. And let's first make our solid Y. So Control Shift Y, and let's make that maybe not exactly a pure white, so sometimes it's better off not to make it totally white. Just add a little bit of color data in there, and let's create a simple vector circle in the middle of that. So we're gonna choose our shape tool, and now let's make sure that we don't have this solid selected while we do that. So let's click elsewhere, anywhere there, to make sure we have nothing at all that is selected, and we're gonna double click on our sphere here. So we don't want an oval, but we wanted it to be centered, so double clicking on it will create a circle and automatically center it, and its size will be the one that our composition has. So we want to make a perfect circle, so let's make it maybe 400 by 400, or maybe that's a bit too big, so but something right about this size I think will be okay. And let's also create a pupil, so the center part of the eye. So let's duplicate our ellipse here, And now this one, we can fill it black. And right now it's too big, so let's get back in the ellipse path and let's reduce its size. And now, depending on your preferred eye color, we can make this one, I don't know, I like green eyes, so let's set it to a green color. So right back in the fill here, let's make something around this kind of color. And we want to add some veins. So one nice and easy way to do that would be to use the CC Advanced Lightning effect, but instead of the default blue, let's put them red. So let's get our advanced lightning. It's not CC, it's just advanced lightning. But let's grab that. Is there another lightning that is? I always forget. So this is the advanced lightning, and the original lightning is kind of obsolete right now. So let's put that right at the center, right there. That's an eye shooting lightning. It's pretty awesome. Let's get right away in the core settings or in the glow settings, and I don't like to use the glow, the built-in glow from this effect. So let's set that as low as we can. Make sure that we don't have anything glowing, and the core color, let's make it red. So that's gonna be some veins here, and we want to drop that right below our shape layer here. So that's one thing. The direction, let's try Omni, and let's drag this as far as we can, so we get one bolt of lightning that shoots in that direction, and it kind of looks like some veins. You can of course mess around with the settings here. I'm not gonna make this whole episode on that, but lots of options here to play around with. I think that we can increase the core radius and also its opacity. Let's set that to 100%. And now we want to make that go all around our circle. So now it doesn't move around when I move the second origin point. So I think that Omni looks nice, but for this specific veins, we're gonna use breaking, which is also nice. It looks like veins. So now this one, if we duplicate our effect, now we can just move the second origin point and make sure that it's composite on the original. So we're gonna simply duplicate it one more time until we fill all the space around our, to get some nice veins everywhere. So I think 6 is all gonna be fine by now. Now next thing, let's create some details in the iris. So now we're gonna make it fairly quick, but if you want to make something really detailed, I would suggest you follow this tutorial from MotionWorks. So in this one, John Dickinson shows how to create this really nice looking and detailed iris. We're gonna make something that's more simple, and also this tutorial on shockwaves by Video Copilot will demonstrate some techniques that we can apply to that. So let's create a new solid of the size of our composition. Let's call this fractal, and let's apply a fractal noise to that. Whoops. To that. And we do want to make sure that our fractal is only occurring where we have our iris here. So we can duplicate that, put it above, and this fractal effect we can mat it there, but then it'll hide the eye, so this can be set to a different blending mode. Let's start on with that, and let's play around with our fractal noise effect. So we want to enhance the contrast maybe, but what we really do want to have with that is something that is more kind of a stretching. So we're gonna uncheck the uniform scaling in the fractal, but right now it's kind of, we want to have this fractal in a circular fashion. So in order to do that, let's get the polar coordinate effects, and let's drop it on there, and let's set that to rect to polar, and set it to 100%. So that will make our fractal follow more of some kind of a circular shape. And we're gonna have a, since the fractal is not tiling, we're gonna have a cut here, but if we can try to make it as less obvious as possible, we might not need to fix it. So let's try that. We don't see that, and it's gonna be so small of detail. And let's animate it, so we can make this loop easily if we make sure that cycle evolution is checked. And let's make a keyframe on frame 0, and let's get to frame 90, and set the evolution to 1 full revolution. So if we look at that, it's gonna have a little bit motion in there. Cool. And now I'm not gonna spend a huge amount of time messing around with that, but on your side you can make your eyeball, your iris, look more interesting than that. If you want, you can add a turbulent displace on there, and let's add it before the polar coordinate, and let's make this one really small. So right here you can see some waviness here that makes it a little bit more presentable as an eye asset, but we don't want to make something too extremely detailed. That will be sufficient for the moment. So let's apply that on our sphere. For the moment, we can increase the size of our sphere with the general size setting in the segment section of TAO, but what if I want to keep that number at 100, and I want to be able to change its radius with the radius setting of the light? To do that, we need to make sure that in paths from TAO lights, we need to check in this size from radius option here. Now that we've done that, we can increase the size of our sphere and apply on our texture on it. So let's go down to the texture section, and let's apply our eye text. So color, texture, eye text. Right. So right now it's not facing the right direction. Let's open up the rotations and make sure that we have something. And I'm not sure if that will also be necessary, but we can, I've just hit Control-Alt-O with the light selected, and we can check the auto orientation, set it to off. That will change nothing in that case, but yeah, so that's an eye. Now the iris might be a little too big. So let's get on texture here, and now that we've got two shape layers, we want to make sure that they are kept at the same size, so we can simply link this one to this one. So this one is our mask for the fractal. So now that if we reduce the size of this, and then we can make sure that if I hit Control-Alt// to refresh, we can make sure that our eye looks a little bit better with this kind of a ratio. Now, ultimately, the best way to texture this would be to have an equirectangular version of the texture to make sure that it maps around the sphere as neatly as possible, but we can get away with a simple one like that for this. Now the goal is not to apply it on one sphere, but now that we've got our eye looking right, let's delete our sphere, and let's put the generate path back on. So right now we don't want a ring eye like that, so let's set that to repeat sphere, and let's set the amount of size to something a little bit greater than that. So now we have along our circular automatically built path, we've got some repeated eyes. So that's pretty cool. Now let's make them a little bit smaller. So now we don't have a light, so we need to use this general size setting in the segment to make them smaller. Let's also rotate them so that we don't have a light anymore, so we have to use those. So now I want to make all of them face outwards. So I want to rotate them on Y, but it doesn't behave. I can rotate them on Z, 90 degrees. And now that makes it sort that if we rotate around, they're all facing outwards. So that's something that we can repeat around now. So also what we want to go in the repeat path section, and let's repeat it something like 3 times to start with, and we don't want to, we want to set the value to the position X of it at 0, and we just want to rotate like that, so we can start to populate some kind of a sphere. Now we're not going to have any way of collision detection. The eyeballs are going to go through each other, and now that's some limitation that we have not really, we don't really have a choice with that kind of stuff. If you need them to be dynamic and to have collision, effective collision with each other, then I would suggest you make this with a traditional 3D software. But now we're exploring with Trapcode TAO. It doesn't matter. We're not aiming at pure realism. Now that we have that, let's also repeat it on the second repeater. And let's try once to start with, and let's rotate on the Y. So something like that, maybe. That's kind of weird. And we can also change now. Let's get this back to 0, and let's come back to our first repetition, and maybe let's change, put a little bit more randomness in there, and then as we rotate this, also put some kind of randomness in there, so they're not all exactly on the same spot, but we just want to make sure that we don't have some of them that are kind of too close together. And we can also increase the world position random if we want to tilt them a little bit. And let me just, I don't like the fact that these are intersecting each other right there. So I might have been better off looking at what did I put initially there in my example. So let's try to put the same values I went and checked. So in the first repeater I have 6 and the symmetric doubler is checked, and that's pretty fine. And I just have the X position rotate 18, so something like that. And this one is have 2 levels of repetitions, or 1, and it's at 0 on X, but 35 and 18. So now we have something that's about the same as in my example. So let's close down the work area at frame 89 so we can look at our texture moving in there. All right. Let's make them all look in random directions, and then let's have them move around randomly and focus to make them look all around 360 degrees around the sphere. So let's get in the segment section, and in the randomness here we can actually change the rotations. So if I put some values in there, then it's gonna kind of rotate our eyeballs there at some random position. So if I keyframe that on frame 0, let's add a keyframe on each, and let's get to the last frame, frame 90. Let's copy and paste. So Control C, Control V, and let's get on frame 45, which is the middle one, and let's set all that to 0. And let's also do the same with, let's get back to our repeat path. Let's set the world random here to 0. Or maybe let's leave it at some lesser value there. So now they're all looking around based on the center point of the sphere. So the ones that are on the top will look upwards. They're all looking in front based on where they are on the sphere. So now that we've keyframed that, they're all gonna come to the position there, and they're gonna go back. Choop, choop. All right, let's make them move randomly. So once again, in the randomness section, we've got some random position X, Y, and Z in there. So as we do that, it'll move things around. Now we can add a wiggle expression on there. So let's fetch the expression from Dan Ebbert's website here. I'm gonna put the link in the description down below. So let's come and copy and paste this patch of code here. So I'm gonna grab it, and let's alt click on random position X, and let's paste that. So right now it's by default is set to a loop time of 3, so 90 frames is 3 seconds, so that's fine for us. And it'll move to an amplitude of 110 at a frequency of once per second. So I don't know what that will look. Let's just set that to quarter for the sake of looking at the motion without making it too long of a render. So they're all moving randomly, and then they all come in stop, but they don't actually stop. So if we want to make it stop, we can keyframe the amplitude. So we need to connect that number here to a custom slider that we can keyframe. So I don't remember why I have a null here, but let's simply make a expression controls, a custom slider control. We're gonna call that pause x wig, and let's duplicate it twice, and each one is gonna have its own axis. So let's get back on here. We can call this layer settings, and let's lock it down here so we keep this here, and let's select our amplitude value here, 110, and we're gonna grab the pick whip here and connect it to the position X custom slider that we just made. So now it's set at 0. We can control the amplitude of our wiggle here. So when it's at 0, it won't move. So that will make it possible for us to make them stop moving by keyframing that. So we're gonna start maybe at 100, and let's see. Let's add a keyframe. So it's gonna start at 100, and right where it's in the middle is gonna be at 0, but let's make it stop a little bit prior to that, and let's copy and paste this keyframe, move it a bit in the front, and let's copy and paste the last keyframe on frame 90 to make sure that it has the same amplitude to start with, but it's gonna loop. So now it's going to come to a full stop when our eyes are gonna rotation is going to make them point all in the same direction, and then it's gonna go back to the wiggle. So let's try a higher frequency here. So that'll make our motion of the eyes a little bit more ecstatic. But let's maybe keep it down in 1.2. And if you're satisfied with the velocity of it all, we can skip to the next. So let's copy that patch of code here that we've got in the random position X, and let's add that to the other axis. So back in the TAO, right at random position Y, let's alt click on the stopwatch, paste what we had, but we're simply going to change this pause X to pause Y. So we have a control for it right there, and also let's paste it on random position Z. So we're gonna have all the axes covered, and let's change that also to Z, so we have all three that are independent now. So let's now our they're gonna move on a random fashion, but they're gonna do so on all three axes. And it seems that yeah, we did keyframe this, but not the other axis. So we also need to paste this on the others. So I've copied the keyframes. I'm going to select the other two custom properties and paste. So we have Circle is gonna stop. They're all gonna point in, and so we can also apply the randomness on the position. And now also let's get back to our keyframe for the rotation. So I want to have it more quick. So they're at this point they'll come and stare, and they'll stay like that. So let's copy those keyframes, and so that way they'll stay fixed to the overwatch position for a little bit longer, and then they'll go back to being scrambled eyes. So let's bring that a little bit closer. And it's always a good idea to work on the curves, so ease those keyframes, but in this example, we're not going to spend too much time on that. So let's look at our keyframes here, and now I want to make sure that the randomness is happening for a longer amount of time, so that, and now it seems like there's kind of a pause there, so they need to now see, it doesn't seem like it updated correctly. So now that I'm testing it, it doesn't seem that After Effects have registered these keyframes here. So I'm gonna hit Control Alt / and re-render again to see what we get. And now it seems that it has been updated, so it's all scrambling, and then they get looking at the right outwards position, and they get back towards the loop point, so it's gonna be kind of seamless, even though we've got a point where it all stops. So this could be our an easy loop point, but we don't need to create that kind of a loop point, because our wiggle is looping right from the expressions. So what else can we add to that? So since we have the automatically the path generator, that's what we're using, so we can change the size, and it kind of will bring them outwards. So one little small detail that we could add is when they get to this position here, they can contract it a little bit, so we can keyframe the size here. So I've just hit the stopwatch here. I'm gonna hit U once again to reveal that, and let's go to this keyframe and make it smaller, so 43, and make sure that it gets back to its original size afterwards. And let's look at that. So they're scrambling. Now they look at this, and they kind of contract, and then they get outward, move again, and all up to the loom point. Maybe that's a little too exaggerated, but it works fine for this. You can spend more time if you want to tweak that motion to get exactly what you want, but this is basic idea of it. What else? What else? Another detail that we could add is some randomness on the rotation as well. So for the randomness here, we also keyframed those, but if we want, we can add wiggles for that also. So let's get back to our settings here, and since they've already have keyframes on them, we're gonna duplicate that. I'm gonna bring that down here or down there, and just not to get too confused, we're gonna call this, at least put something to tell us that this is messing with the rotation. So it's rotting eye, pretty disgusting. So let's also come here, and we can remove the keyframes. For that, set them back to 0, and we can copy and paste one of those. But just remember that we gotta make sure we change the code to what's right. So here it's X, not Z, and it's rot. All right, so let's copy that, paste it here, make it a little bit more room so we can see, and here it's Y, and do the same for the Z. So I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing what's going on down there, but let's get on to it. So that's Z. So as we look at that, they're all going to be wiggling their rotation in random directions, and then they get back. But it's kind of confusing to have at the same time keyframes and frequency. So let's leave one that we can keyframe. Is the eye rotation, I think. So this one, it makes our eyes rotate from the right to the left. So this one we're gonna keep the keyframe. So let's get back here, and we want to make sure that this randomness is pretty high there, and we're gonna keyframe it to 0, and we're gonna go there once again, make another keyframe, and copy this first one there. So let's look at that. They're all scrambled, they're all rotating. Because what I really want is kind of a feeling of them like quickly switching to this state, like as if they were quickly turning around, focus on something. So let's increase this even more. Let's look at what we have. So they're getting positioned. Let's make that happen a little bit later even. Right. So they're looking. They're seeking. And we can increase the frequency of this kind of rotation here, and this is also something that we could have connected with our own custom sliders here to prevent us from having to mess around in the code here, but for the moment it'll be fine. Let's get back to our settings, and here we've got some keyframes I had to worry about. So instead of 100 here, now we don't need this one anymore. Now where do we have this error? It's this was not even connected to the right one, so X there, and yeah, the Z maybe let's set it higher, and the X as well. So they'll move around, rotate, and switch to still, contract the little sphere of eyeballs, and get back to the motion. Oh yeah, and if we change those numbers here on those keyframes, we have to make sure that it reflects here as well. So let's simply copy both of those here and refresh, or else they are not going to be lining up at the end of the loop. So pretty straightforward there. And let's look at the whole thing. All right. Now another touch that we can add if we want. Let's save that. Grape. Toot. And let's get in our eye texture once again. But first let's make sure that we're somewhere around where to get in this position here. And we can double click here. And that's the shape layer. We've got our ellipse 2, right? We can change the name of that by hitting enter on it. So let's call this pupil. And we're gonna enlarge it. So as they all focus, they're gonna dilate their pupils, those eyes. So we're gonna keyframe the size of that. See how much wider our pupil is. It kind of gives a different looks to the eye. They look a little bit more on the effect of some psychedelics or something. Not that it's already evident that to get some bright red veins in your eye like that, you must at least have smoked something. That's my guess. And now it won't be visible yet. We have to Control Alt refresh. So yeah, right now look at that. They all have bigger pupils. We're in quarter res. I know it's a bit hard to see with that, so let's get back at that. And they're all randomly rotating. They're going to get placed, and then they start back moving around. Hup, Joe. All right. So not exactly as ideal as I would like to have it in terms of motion, but to get perfect motion, there's got to be a little bit more tweaking time involved. And that's a tutorial, so I'm not going to spend hours of tweaking, but already one of the quick tweak kind of tricks I can tell you right away that this is a random seed. So for all that we changed on the random position X and all that, it's got a random seed, and also it's unique when by default our repetitions will have the same randomness, but if we check that, since we repeat them, they'll get it's supposed to make them a little bit more random, yeah. And of course we can also change the random seed of that. So each different value that we put there will get us a different result, but based on the same initial settings that we've put there. So it's kind of a way to scramble and browse through different results without changing the pace of things. So once again, not exactly, I would tweak this even more, but for the moment let's keep it like that. It's pretty okay for the nature of what we want to do. Now we're just gonna work for the rest of the tutorial, we're gonna just work a little bit on the looks of that. So how to make it a little bit nicer before we output this loop. First thing, we can increase the ambient occlusion. So since our sphere are a little bit smaller than default elements, they'll get not as much shadow in the contact points, in the contact areas. So we can increase that a little bit, maybe drop down the scale of that, so since we're treating smaller objects than default. And now this is something I've noticed, but it might differ in different TAO compositions. But once we have the ambient occlusion active, if we're using multi-sample, we're always gonna get kind of this white crease there. So let's set that to, let's use the super sample for that. We can just set it to 9x. It's gonna make everything overall a little bit more blurry, but it's gonna kind of make it a little bit nicer on the contact point. So that's pretty nice there. We've got, it's not the best thing in the world, but it's kind of cool looking. What else we could do? Oh yeah, it's set to flat by default. I would set it to smooth. See there, I don't know if you can notice, we can see the polygons, the low poly on our sphere. As long as we set that to smooth, it's gonna smooth up our eyeballs. And let's make our background. So I'm gonna hit Control Y to make a new solid. Let's call this BJ background, and we're gonna simply make a ramp, not go overboard on this. So let's make a ramp. Let's make a radial ramp, and let's put down the center area there. We can make this, add a little bit of color, like let's get in the tones of the veins maybe, and the center we can keep it close to white. So now I'm hitting Control Shift H to reveal the layer controls, but let's change that a little bit, just to have a little something that our system of eyeball might sit on, not something that's too complicated, but let's, and yeah, something like that maybe. And I kind of want a little bit more white in the middle, but as soon as I move my center point, and that's not exactly what I want to do. So what we can simply quickly do is fetch a circle here and quickly put that on there. Normal for the blending mode, and as we increase the radius there, it'll get bigger. And then we can feather the edges. So that makes us a little bit more of a bright spot in the middle. And if we want to add a little bit more detail even on top of that, since this is pretty circular feathered gradient, we can add a turbulent displace on that. So a little trick there, really subtle, but it's all about the subtlety sometimes. And if we do that, it'll simply add a little bit of randomness on there, and we don't need that to be animated. So that's it for the background. Let's light this up with some sIBL. So custom sIBL. I'm gonna grab one from my own personal collection. This is I've got some of them available for download. I'll put the link in the description below. So I'm gonna grab this EXR. This is one shot of the studio I'm actually working in. So you can grab your own any. I'm gonna make sure that this one is available for you, so you can use it in anything that you want. Let's grab that, slide it to the composition icon there. It's pretty gloomy studio, eh? And this is an EXR. It's a blend of 3 different ranges of of color data in 3 different images. So if we set that to 32 bits per channel, now I'm hitting Alt, holding Alt and clicking on this number here. So now I can come in with a levels effect on that, and I can brighten this up if needed. And we don't lose any details because it's high dynamic range. So this, we can call it ref. It's going to be our reflection composition. Let's drag this one onto the composition icon, and this is going to be our diffusion. So this is something I show in other tutorials, but some of you might be the first time that you watch one, so I hope I'm not repeating myself for some others of you that have already watched other tutorials of mine. But let's come in here and get in the composition setting. The diffusion, we're gonna use something that's small, so let's make sure that it's for something like 200 pixels. So now that we've resized our composition, our image is now really big in there. So we're gonna simply hit Control-Alt-F, and that's gonna make it fit to the size of this. And we want to add a fast blur to that. So let's have this selected. Simply double click, it's gonna add it. Make sure that repeat edge pixels is active, and let's set that to something pretty high, something around that. So now we do have our sIBL reflection and diffusion comps ready. Let's bring those in our timeline. We don't need them to be visible. Let's get to our TAO layer, down to in the material and lighting, to the image-based lighting. So we've got some pre-built environments here, church interior, stuff like that. We'll need, of course, to mess around with it a little bit, but we're gonna leave it to off because we're using our own. So if we want to use our own custom maps, we've got these sliders here. We can select the reflection and the diffusion. So this is, you can see my studio here reflecting in each of those eyeballs. So an eye is a little bit reflective, but not all the way like Chrome would be. So we can bring down the reflection level, and as soon as we do that, we'll notice that we don't get as much diffusion as would be ideal to get. But already look at those shadows, those details. It's not fitting with our actual background because it's much too bright right now. But let's get this on to 333, and already we have something that's much better looking. Now we can increase the Fresnel. That'll make insert that our reflection doesn't occur as much on depending on where the reflection is happening, depending on if it's facing or not the camera, if it's on the side of our objects, or if it's right in the middle. So it'll attenuate a little bit of the reflection that we've got in here. And now we can probably tone down this ambient occlusion. Let's turn it off just to see because now we do get some of darker spots because of the sIBL, and we might get some little seams here and there. Metal, I don't think that's something that we want to add in to our eyes, but diffuse hold out will darken all of this. So that's yeah, that's pretty much where we can get right now. We can increase the lighting furthermore if we add more light. So we're gonna check in the Bloomy lights. Let's leave it off for the moment. So let's create 2-point lights. So first, Control-Alt-Shift-L, keyboard shortcut. Let's make it a point light, this one, and let's make some red lights, something that's close to the veins once again. and let's call this TAO Lumi. So right now it's off, so it's not checked in, but we're calling it that because we don't want to have to change it back if we try it. So a normal light, this will act exactly as if it was called any other name. It'll add some glows to that. So maybe that's sufficient for what we want. If we set that to 0, it's in the center. Now it's a little bit up front a little bit. So let me hit Control-Shift-H. I'm going to just move it right around there. And let's see where I can put this to get a little bit of backlight. But once again, I don't need any backlight on this. I just want to make it even brighter to get some kind of a hotspot here of this color. And let's look at the difference if we check in TAO Lumi. So this is going to actually pour some lights from this on the object, and the radius controls the width of the glow around the light, but now it's pretty intense. So in this case, I would use more of just a normal light and not a Lumi one, because it's easier to get those kind of simple hotspots. Let me just Control refresh to make sure that is it still a TAO Lumi light now? I'm having a hard time to tell. So let's just make sure that it's checked off. And now it's checked in. Let's call it TAO Lumi. So yeah, I would keep it like that, probably. Let's move this on the side there. And let's duplicate that. Move this on the bottom there. Now we've got a little bit much more red in there. So let's get in the light fall off. So once again, in the material and lighting, the light fall off, we can set that to smooth and turn it down really smaller than that. Let's shut that down to 0. I'm kind of having a hard time to see where they are aiming at right now. I'm kind of sorry for that. Perhaps that might not be the best use of Lumis, but once again, I'm not particularly fond of how they look right now in comparison to my example that I had prior to that. Let's shut those Lumis off. Yeah, this is much better. Let's bring that. And we can rotate the environment so we can get a little bit more blue lighting from there. And once again, we could add some nice normal texture on there to give it more of an organic feel, but we're simply not going to get that much detailed right now. So yeah, let's keep it like that. Get back to the oh, the ambient occlusion is off. Let's set it back on. That's what I turned it off to just to check something and I forgot to put it back on. So there is a little bit nicer how it looks now. And let's increase the diffusion, but not too much. Now it looks a little bit better. And we can perhaps increase a little bit of the reflection to see where that brings us, and decrease the Fresnel. Depending on what we're trying to achieve. Now it's just the little tweaks once again. I don't want to make it harder on you to follow. But I'll include both projects in the files to make sure that you can look at the other projects that I made this kind of animation, which I spent a little bit more time tweaking, so I feel it might be a little bit more nicer. But it's the main idea of how this was built, just like so. All right, so this sums it up for what I wanted to talk about today. So another cool thing about Trapcode TAO now, we don't use any offset path in there. We don't need it because we have the automatically generated path. But since it's also picking it up from the mask, remember that we could always come in here and add a mask. Let's see what that will do. It's gonna get repeated, so it's gonna get eyes everywhere exploding, and we can, perhaps that's not a good idea, so we can just shut it off from here. And what if, not from the light but from the masks there. What if we want to get one real big eyeball in there? We can make Tao sphere back in there, and this Tao sphere, let's make it much bigger, and Control Alt O, auto orientation to off, and let's rotate that. And let's move that around. So if you want to have some big ol' eye coming out of there, maybe. So that's something that would be interesting. Perhaps. I don't know. Experiment. Make it your own, and post any example that you might have. I'm curious to see them, and I hope that you can come up with something a little bit nicer than that. I don't really like how the light is getting, it doesn't look eyeball-y enough. But anyways, that's the main idea. So that's it for today. And thank you very much for watching, and as always, see you next time.